Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everybody. It's also a pleasure to share this work with you. I am Tal Shoshani. I'm a PhD student at USC Marshall in the marketing group. I'm actually finishing this semester my PhD. I'm going to join Chapman University. It's in Orange County. So I'm going to stay here in Southern California, which I really love. Okay, so this is this project is joint with Karan Zhao. He's a PhD student at NYC, and also Davide. And we're going to talk about the impact of short-term rental regulations on urban spending. Okay. So short-term rentals, Airbnb is a major platform, and it's really transformed the way we travel. It provides more accommodation options. It's often cheaper than hotels. For example, I'm staying in an Airbnb in Pacific Beach, so much cheaper than the hotels in the area, and better located than hotels, right? So we have many different neighborhoods with Airbnbs that hotels don't even exist there. And there is research that has shown that people wouldn't go to the city, wouldn't travel to the city without Airbnb. Okay, and maybe something that will be important to this paper, it can generate positive impact on the local economy. Okay, so we have tourists coming to the city and they bring their money and spend their money. So this is actually a nice breakdown. This is by a survey by Airbnb. And so we can see the breakdown of daily spend by our Airbnb guests. And we can see that we spend on restaurants, entertainment, retail, and so on. And you can see that the top spending category is restaurants. And keep that in mind because we are going to focus on restaurants in this talk. So there is a benefit for from Airbnb on the local economy. But despite that, all of these benefits, cities are banning or considering to ban Airbnb from the city. And the main concern is housing affordability, right? They want to improve housing affordability, so to convert all of the short-term rentals to the long-term rental market. Okay, so we have more units for the locals. And so, for example, you have Barcelona banning Airbnb. Many cities in Europe, in the US, and so on. And this is the most aggressive ban to date. And this is in New York City. Okay? So it was implemented in September 2023. And just to give you a sense of magnitude, so there was 23,000 Airbnb listings before the law. It's called Local Law 18. I'm going to explain that. And after the introduction of the law, there was 4,000 or 5,000 Airbnb listings. So it's a huge shock for the system. Okay, and it's just overnight. And remember that for restaurants, tourists are really important, right? So this is a quote from a restaurant owner in New York City. She says, "As we continue working to recover from the challenges of the pandemic, a new policy is making it even harder for small businesses like ours to thrive." And she mentions, Sandra, she mentions the reduction in the number of tourists in the neighborhoods, okay? And in fact, if you look at this statistic from the National Restaurant Association, 30% of the revenue of US restaurants comes from travelers and visitors. So for restaurants, it's really important to have tourists in the city. So in this paper, the question that we are asking, how do STR restrictions affect consumer restaurant spending in a major city? Okay, so for us, it's these bans. It's really good news because we can study like an actual experiment. I mean, it's not good news for the tourists or Airbnb hosts. And there is growing literature studying the effect of these regulations on different outcomes. Okay, so the outcome that we're going to look at is restaurant spending. and it's related to the local service economy. How do we think about this question? Yes.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, in these other work, what is the effect of these restrictions on what else happens to this real estate? Is it rented to locals? Like, what should we think, you guys?
Yeah. So for instance, you have basically research showing that there is if you, for example, you have more Airbnb, more short-term rentals, basically it's not good for housing affordability, right?
But then if you restrict, so like then I don't know, has anyone done MS studies on like the real estate outcomes of this specific?
Yes. So basically we have Shader, I think, I don't know how to pronounce that, and they look basically at the welfare of people in the city, okay, and they show basically that there is less benefit for the locals, okay, from Airbnb, but they basically look at that for Airbnb, okay. So how do we think about this effect? Like the mechanism. So we have local law 18. Again, I'm going to describe that. And it reduces the short-term rentals supply. Okay. And then directly, it should reduce the tourist inflows to the city, right? Because you have less accommodation options. But also kind of indirectly or mediated by hotel prices. So because for hotels, you have less competition from Airbnb, if they are at capacity, which is the case in New York City, and even if not, they can raise prices because of less competition. And now as a tourist, maybe I consider to stay at Airbnb, but now I have to stay at the hotel, which is pricier, and then I might consider like not going to the city. Okay, so there is a direct effect and also kind of indirect effect mediated by hotel prices. So this is one channel that we think will reduce restaurant spending if you have less tourists in the city. But another channel is that if you have hotel prices increasing, right, you'll have tourists, those who come to the city, less discretionary income, right? So I can, if I have like a fixed budget for the trip, I can spend less on restaurants if I pay more for hotels and so on. Okay, so this is another channel that we're thinking will reduce restaurant spending. So this from tourists, but you can also think about the locals, right? So for example, you have Airbnb hosts that lose income now. So they themselves will maybe spend less on restaurants as well. Okay, and also there is a kind of a feedback loop. If you have lower performance for restaurants, then employees at those restaurants, they will have also less income because they get less hours, less tips, and so on. And so that also reduces their discretionary income and eventually restaurant spending. Okay. So so local law 18 in New York City. Basically, it aims to address housing affordability. It's effective from September 2023. And the key requirements, which is why it's so restrictive, so the host must register with the city, okay? And they have to be present in the unit during the stay of the guests. You cannot rent out for more than 2 guests or an entire apartment. And also, platforms like Airbnb must verify the registration with the city, okay? And the impact you can see, so it's basically from, we went from 20K Airbnb listings to 4 to 5 Airbnb listings. And it's like 80% reduction in the supply. And just to give you, like, to put it into perspective, in New York City, I think there is 130K hotel rooms. So it's a big fraction of the accommodation options. Okay. So we are going to look at the restaurant spending, and for that we're going to use SafeGraph data. Okay, so SafeGraph, maybe some of you are familiar, but basically they have a panel of 10 million users in the US, users of credit and debit cards, and they basically track transactions for these users. So basically, if I go to some restaurant and I purchase something, so basically they can track that. Okay, you find in the panel. And then before they release the data, it's going to be at the restaurant month level. So for each restaurant, we can observe the total spending at the restaurant, the number of transactions, and the number of customers, and also the home city of the customers. Okay, and the home city of the customers is going to be important to distinguish, and I'm going to show that later, between restaurants that cater to tourists, those restaurants with high share of non-locals coming from outside the city, and those with low share of non-locals. And basically, the Safegraph, the company, they infer the home city based on the purchase activity of the user. Okay? We're going to focus on offline transactions and not online transactions because at the same time of the policy, the local law 18, there was also a policy of increasing the minimum wage of delivery drivers. So we wanted basically to reduce the contamination of the effect for the online transactions. Okay, it's pretty robust even if we include the online transactions. Some additional covariates just to control for things. So we have weather, we have consumer price index, and population to control, for example, for potential demand. Yes, question.
Clarification. So,
Yeah.
by home city of customers, do you mean see the distribution of cities for each restaurant, or do you see more granular like my home city?
Yeah, good question. So basically, it's a distribution. So basically, for each restaurant a month, so we have the transactions, and then we have the number of transactions coming from New York City, the number of transactions coming from LA, for example. Okay. Yes.
You have cell phone data in the sense you can check whether this ban actually led to a decrease in the number of visitors. Because it might substitute to other things like staying with friends. I know that would work against your results, but I'm kind of curious, like, do we actually see a big drop in visitors?
Yeah, so basically, so the number of transactions will be one thing, right? It's gonna capture that, I think. We do have access actually to cell phone data, like GPS data, from the same company actually. They sold their product to Advanced Research, it's called now. And we can also check that to see it to.
It would also be based on your reply, you can use that as a mediator. Because that's part of your hypothesis about how the ban works.
Yeah, so basically we can look at basically the number of visitors coming to the and sometimes like the cell phone data is even more granular in terms of the home location of the visitor. So we can do that as well. Okay, so we have 19 major CBSAs. So CBSA is like, think about the metropolitan area. It's basically core-based statistical area. It combines several counties, not necessarily from the same state, but they're economically integrated. And one of them is the CBSA of New York City. The analysis period is from July 2022 to July 2024. And so we have enough time, 14 months before the regulation, 11 months after the regulation. And so we're gonna keep balanced data. So we drop restaurants with missing values in the total spending. This is basically to control for entries and exits of restaurants. We do have robustness check where basically we include restaurants with missing values, and it's robust to that as well. And in the control group, we are not gonna include New Jersey because of potential special spillover. People might choose to go to New Jersey instead of New York City because it's like a commuting distance to New York City. I'm going to actually show it later, the spillover effect on the New Jersey. Yes.
So, maybe it's because I lived in a neighborhood with a lot of Airbnbs. I think the entry and exit is really interesting because if you have exit of tourist-focused restaurants and subsequent entry of local focused restaurants, I think that is a highly relevant outcome to evaluating this policy.
Yeah, definitely. I think so too. Actually, we were wondering if we should include exits of restaurants as an outcome. I think that will speak also to the economic value of Airbnb, right? We can do that essentially, like basically look at the attrition or dropout of restaurants from there. So entries is also interesting by itself. Yes. Question?
So with the data, can you look at Airbnb spending? Like thinking of spillovers of Airbnb consumptions in New Jersey? Or just restaurants?
So basically we have restaurants. There is a report about the Airbnb activity from AirDNA, this company that basically collects data from Airbnb. So we are going to use that basically as the evidence for the activity at Airbnbs. But what we are going to look at, the outcome of interest is basically restaurant spending. Okay, so how we are going to identify the effect? The key assumption is that the local law 18, it's basically the goal was housing affordability. So it's more exogenous to restaurant spending, consumer restaurant spending. The challenge is that New York City restaurants are very much different than non-New York City restaurants. For example, what we see in the data, I don't include the summer statistics, but we see like a higher share of non-locals at restaurants in New York. So this is one example. And what we're gonna do is basically to match restaurants, New York City restaurants and non-New York City restaurants on several covariates that I'm gonna show you. And then to estimate the effect, we just use a standard difference in differences. So the covariates basically for the propensity score matching, it's going to be monthly total spending. Okay, so for each month before the regulation, and number of customers, and also share of non-local customers. Okay, and we have one-to-one matching. We also do one to many, so 1 to 3, 1 to 5, and 1 to 7. It's robust across these specifications. So we'll have 3,000 treated restaurants and 3,000 matched control restaurants. This is the plot of the matching quality. So we have 3 blocks here. So basically this, for example, the first block is total spending for each month. And on the x-axis, it's basically a standardized mean difference between the treatment and the control group for each covariate. Okay. So you can see in blue the unmatched control group, and in orange or red you can see the matched. Okay, so you can see a reduction in the difference between the treatment and the control group when you match. Yes.
So one thing have you considered if the hotels were strategic about this? So Airbnb going down, let's hike up the prices, and because they also did a competitive action, that's why restaurants are also affected.
Yeah, so this is one of the when I show the channel basically of the reduction in restaurant spending, one of the things is basically an increase in hotel prices. So we don't have so we're still waiting for data for hotel prices to check if it happens. But basically we just looked at the reports now, and there is a huge increase in the hotel prices.
So the policy should also cover what they do then.
Yes.
Maybe an implication of your work, right?
Yes. So basically, so it's gonna reduce the the discretionary income for tourists, for example, and also when it's pricey, those maybe I'm not gonna go to this, right? Okay, so the difference in differences, pretty much standard. We have the outcome is basically it's going to be the logarithm of the total spending. So basically, it's going to be the interpretation in terms of percentages, or it's going to be the logarithm of transactions, number of transactions, and the logarithm of average spending. So the average spending, I'm going to explain why it's important for us. It's basically the total spending divided by the number of transactions. So it's the average per visit, average spending per visit. Okay. And so we have restaurant fixed effects, your month fixed effects, all the covariates that I mentioned before. And beta is going to be the average treatment effect on the treated, okay, of the local O18 on restaurant spending. So to check for identification, like to see if we have parallel trends, I mean, essentially before the regulation. So this is a graph that shows the effect on total spending. So on the x-axis, you have the month, The red dashed line is basically the month preceding the introduction of the law. So it's August 2023. And on the y-axis, you have the difference between the treatment and the control group, which is basically the treatment effect. Yes.
Do you have data on whether the purchases from restaurant were delivery or restaurant?
Say again. So
Do you have data on whether the sales of restaurant, credit card sales are delivery or in restaurant?
yes. So basically, we can distinguish between the two.
So,
Yeah.
so that suggests you might have a different control, right? Because the delivery people are local, right? Predominantly, I would think, that's an assumption to check it out. You think tourists use delivery more?
I do. I've food delivered a lot when I'm.
Yeah, but either way, it suggests that if that were the case, then flip it, you know, that the people who have delivery are gonna be affected differently than the people who don't have delivery, and that sets up a treatment or contrast between those two groups.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about, like online.
And then you
stuff.
control, I mean, now you're controlling for any restaurant specific effects,
Right.
and many other things, and for uptake and changing.
But there is no delivery there. That's only offline.
There's no delivery.
Yeah, we draw it. There is no delivery. It's only offline. We call it offline, which means no app. But
Essentially, yes.
Not delivery.
But yeah, you can.
Yeah. Essentially, we have that data. So basically, 85% of the transactions are offline, 15% are online.
So
The thing is that, yeah, the thing is that we have we have a policy at the same time where the New York City increased the minimum wage for delivery drivers.
So there, what's
That's why-
interesting, offline is gonna be more subject to uptake of, in other words, a substitution effect to.
Yeah.
Delivery, and if the takeoff and delivery is correlated with the timing of the regulation.
Mhm.
Right, there's a confound, and I don't think the regulation's a step function, right? It takes time to delist Airbnbs and such, so.
Yeah.
Again, there's just yet another reason to think about.
Yeah, definitely. So, yes.
Jumping all across that, and how does the policy work? So if I book a Thanksgiving stay in New York City in June,
Mhm.
the policy's in September, does that just get canceled?
Okay,
Does
so
it persist?
yeah, so let me say something about that actually. So first of all, before the regulation, we don't see a difference, substantial difference between the treatment and the control group, which is good for us for identification. Then after the regulation, we see an immediate decrease, right, in restaurant spending. Know that in January 2024, we see like a dip in restaurant spending. And the thing is that one potential reason is that Airbnb, there was like a grace period from the city of New York, where if you book Airbnb before the regulation and you check in prior to December 31st, so basically you can stay like business as usual, okay? And then after that, not anymore. So maybe that is the reason why we see this dip in January 2020, okay? There's also potential recovery actually after several months with which is interesting. I think we need to investigate that more, why it happens, and you will have some thoughts about that actually. So looking forward to hearing that. And so this is basically the effect over time. If we want to summarize the results, so this is basically the ATT, average treatment effect on the treated for all of these periods. And so we have a 7.5% total spending, the effect on the total spending is 7.5%. We have number of transactions, a decrease of 5%, and also the average spending also decreases. So first of all, the number of transactions decreasing is consistent with less tourists coming to the city, very less visitors. And the average spending that is decreasing is also interesting because it can be consistent with the idea of less discretionary income. So even if I go to the restaurant, I spend less on average. Okay. And just to put it into perspective, some numbers. And so we have a back of the envelope calculation. Very simple. Basically, we have the taxable restaurant sales from a report of the city of New York, which was 27 billion. We take only 85% of that because we focus on offline transactions only. And actually in the data, it's also 85%, and in the report, it's 85%. So it was nice to see the consistency between the report and the data. And so this is the actual sales, and then we have the counterfactual, which is coming from the 7.5 decrease in total spend. Okay, so basically, then we have the counterfactual, what would have been the total spending absent the regulation, and then we take the difference between the two, the actual and the counterfactual, and the difference is basically the estimated revenue loss, which is about $2 billion in 1 year, which is not a small number. Yes.
I don't think Ollie's here to scold me for asking too much.
I'm right behind you.
So this might be understated in the sense there's restaurant closures too.
Yes. So we thought about it. This is why it's interesting to have this outcome, the closure of restaurants. And I think we underestimate that. And this is only for restaurants, keep in mind. We can also look at entertainment, grocery stores, and so on. Yeah, basically, we're excluding the, yes.
I might have missed this earlier, but do you have a sense of like what share or what is the share of revenue from out of town tourists for the average restaurant?
Yeah, we have this statistic. It's basically in New York City, it's about 40%, something like that. So the national average is basically 30% from that statistic that I showed from the National Restaurant Association. In New York City, it's even higher. It's about 40%. Okay. Okay, so some heterogeneity and the mechanism. So we have different types of restaurants that we want to look at. First of all, one dimension that we want to look at is the share of non-locals at the restaurant. So basically what we have the home city of the restaurant, of the visitors, and then we can calculate the share of non-locals for each month. And then we have a median split on that variable. And so you can see on the left, local versus tourist-oriented restaurants. So, and you can see that the effect is concentrated among the tourist-oriented restaurants, which is also, again, consistent with the less tourists coming to the city. The interesting thing is that the average spending decreases both for the local-oriented and the tourist-oriented restaurants. So it might be the case also that the locals themselves spend less on restaurants as well. Okay. Then we have price level, low versus high priced restaurants. And we can also see that the effect is concentrated among the high priced restaurants. Could be consistent with the less discretionary. Yes.
I'm wondering what's the reason behind the lower average spending from local customers, because I think the previous literature showed that this Airbnb brand kind of increased the customer welfare for the local economy because of like house affordability.
Yeah, good question. So as I mentioned, basically you have Airbnb hosts that lose their income. This is one reason. Another reason is basically a feedback loop where you have a reduction in restaurant spending. So you have employees suffering from that. And it's not only restaurants. Think about like the entertainment industry and so on, right? So you have employees that basically get less money and they can spend less on restaurants as well, okay? If the rent was decreasing, for example, then you have the locals potentially can spend more on restaurants. The thing is that we have data from Zillow. For that period, for 1 year, it didn't decrease the rent. Okay, so I don't know if I can attribute to that thing. It's not, and I'm not saying that it's not decreasing the rent in the long term because we have only 1 year here. Okay, and actually there is research that shows that it takes 2 years actually to basically decrease the rents. Okay. So now we have more direct evidence about the tourists that come, less tourists coming to the city. So we have data from passengers at airports, major airports in the US. Okay, so this is from Bureau of Transportation Statistics, and we have that at the month level. Okay, at the month and airport level. So we are gonna treat JFK, LaGuardia, and EWR as the treated group, okay? And for the rest, we have them as the control group. It's the same time window, and we use the same PSM and differences. And what we see is that a reduction also in the passenger volume at the airports of New York City, something like 4%, depending on the specification. The 4% is pretty much consistent with the number of transactions that decreased by 5%. Okay, so it was nice to see that. And also, I'm not showing that here, but the dynamic of the effect is pretty much similar to the dynamic that we see for the total spending. So last thing is basically looking at New Jersey as a special spillover. So we have evidence from AirDNA that again collects data on Airbnb, and they show that in New Jersey, because of the ban, they are doing great. So basically, they see an increase of about 50% in the activity of Airbnb in Jersey City and New York. And basically, what we could do is to look at restaurant spending in these cities, right? And so basically, we have the same design. New Jersey is going to be the treatment group, and New York City cannot be in the control group. And then we compare that to the rest of the cities that we have in the data. And what we see is that there is an increase, significant increase in spending in New Jersey. It's about 10%, but it's not going to offset the loss in New York City, because 10% in New Jersey, you have much smaller number of restaurants in those cities, okay? So there is a special displacement of demand. People who plan to go to New York City now are going to New Jersey, and they spend their money in New Jersey, okay? Let me conclude. So we see an effect of the New York City Local Law 18 effect on restaurant spending. There is a decrease of 7.5%, okay, which translated to almost $2 billion in 1 year, okay? And we show evidence for two channels. One is fewer tourists coming to the city, and another one is the less discretionary income. And I think the main lesson here is basically when you design these housing policies, well, one thing, the goal I understand is the housing affordability, but you have to take into account all of the local economy as well, okay? So there is something that is important to take into account, yes.
I like the way that you've used the data. I don't know where it is in the review process, but I think reviewers would ask, well, are there some positive things? So in SafeRep, you can look at maybe grocery stores spending does go up by locals or some other things. Another welfare application is, I have a paper that uses this data, and we find that alcohol consumption inadvertently goes up.
Oh,
Strip clubs go up. So certain things that maybe you don't put the philosophical thing about it, but there are certain industries that pop up that from a welfare standpoint, at least you have a policy welfare outcome about.
Yeah, so basically you look at some heterogeneity across different industries.
Yes.
Yes.
So not be so blanket about it's just going down, well, there's these other things that some are good, some are bad.
Yeah, interesting. Actually we try to look at different industries. One of them is the laundry industry. I did just for a sanity check, and there is no effect, zero effect for the laundry.
Yeah, you need some specific
yes.
things that don't change.
Yes, exactly.
That's a left field comment, but inspired by some more Ken stuff. Like, I think Google search data might be interesting too, in the sense, if I look for search for restaurants, specifically, that volume should go down as well, as because there would be more confirmed evidence specifically.
Interesting. Yeah, so basically,
And it's easy data to get.
Yeah. Basically, to look at online user behavior. Okay.
Ken,
I finished the wait. Okay, I'm gonna. Yes.
So I don't know if this exists, but is there public transportation between Jersey and New York? It'd be interesting to see if that goes up.
Yeah, very.
Because in some sense, like the fact that Jersey exists might be reducing that global pointing. It might be keeping it down, because in a world where Jersey is not so close, this could be even worse.
Even worse, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But also you're getting marketers going into the city, which actually, that's significant.
Yeah, no, but definitely, I mean,
Yeah, you look at that.
what's that?
Then you look at Uber. No,
Yes, we have,
No,
not for New Jersey.
not Uber from New Jersey.
No, only New York City.
That was
Yeah.
that's trip, the number of trips.
Yes.
And just on the heterogeneity of restaurant type, it's more like, first, like, what's the threshold between local and tourist? And then second, like, are there other kinds of, do they differ in other observable areas, like establishment age, cuisines, price points?
Yeah, so cuisine, we can use that, like you mean in the matching?
No, just like
Yeah,
the
heterogeneity.
heterogeneity analysis. I'm just wondering, like, are these different kinds of restaurants?
Yeah. So the price point, we have like low price, the higher price. Then we have also only the locals versus non-locals. You were asking about the threshold. I don't remember exactly the numbers. A median split. It was a median split. I don't remember exactly the number of the share of non-locals at that point. But yeah, so another one that you mentioned, like I mentioned for stability.
Well, I just wondering, yeah, what is there something that makes a restaurant a tourist restaurant and one that's like more of a local restaurant?
I see what you're doing.
Especially like something like price or just that there's revenue loss, but these are like very pricey restaurants versus
Yeah.
affordable.
Yeah, I think so. So I think price is one thing. Is actually correlated with the tourists versus non-tourists. And then locals and non-locals. I think it's pretty much direct. In the sense that it's related to the, if it's catered to the, right? Yeah. Yeah, other questions? Okay. So I think it should go in one of those.
Well, thank you so much for giving me this paper to read. I truly enjoyed reading this paper. I think this answers a very relevant policy question in the heat of the debates around short-term rentals. So my name is Meng Liu. I'm an assistant professor of marketing at WUSTL. So again, it's my honor to discuss this wonderful paper. So first of all, I'm going to start by talking about why we and the motivation of this research. In the past, I'm not going to do the literature justice here because, it is a large literature and evolving to date. Basically, a central theme is that STRs, the short-term rentals, create gains and losses across sectors, far beyond housing. Right, so you can talk about the benefits, costs that are shown to be relevant in housing, real estate, tourism, accommodation, local services, labor, neighborhood characteristics, so on and so forth. So a central theme seems to be that people disagree with each other, right? Policymakers disagree with each other in terms of where the value added is and where the damages are, right? So you have multifaceted effects which create real trade-offs and which create, different policy approaches adopted by policymakers and the cities across the globe. So here, when we talk about policies revolving around the short-term rentals, we are not talking about yes or no. We're talking about the spectrum as adopted by cities, right? You can go from very light touches, such as requiring registration of hosts, to outright ban adopted by cities such as New York City and Barcelona. So what makes this paper specifically interesting is that a lot of causal evidence has been provided by looking at how the entry and expansion of STRs, but much less is documented for from this sharp contraction and withdrawal. Okay, to go back to some of the questions raised earlier. So this creates a real contribution to the literature. And in particular, I like the angle of this research. That is, these authors really do a great job advocating that, the full welfare analysis should be going beyond the housing sector, right? So for example, what would be the consequences to some of the downstream industries or sectors? So for example, the food and dining industry, right? So I think this is a unique contribution. So now I'd like to start by summarizing this paper in one slide. So the question is very straightforward. What would be the impact of New York City short-term rental crackdown on restaurant revenue? Okay, and the setting is very unique and very, it's great to exploit this local law 18 passed in September 2023 that caused the 80% Airbnb supply drop. I think that is a sizable and valuable and sudden and meaningful drop to exploit. And also it's great to have this restaurant month level data covering a lot of restaurants in a lot of metropolitan areas, which gives you a lot of granularity and texture into, how these effects manifest, as opposed to, city by month level data. Design is very appropriate. They use, matched restaurants and DID, very standard approaches, but very appropriate for what they do. And the main effect is that the crackdown on short-term rentals leads to 7.5% less spending in restaurants, right? That comes from 5% fewer transactions and 2.3% lower spend per transaction, which is very substantial. And the mechanism part is the part that I find most interesting, specifically how these different pieces of evidence that come together to paint this coherent story. Where if you shut down on STRs, you will have fewer visitors, which can give you less restaurant revenue. So where they document that the losses are concentrated in non-local restaurants or high-priced restaurants that non-locals frequent more. And also they document this decline in airport arrivals, and also this nice spillover that happening to adjacent areas, the New Jersey area, which where the restaurant spending is up by 10%. So now, I wanted to really talk about, highlight the key things that make this a great paper, okay? So first of all, this is, obviously, this is a huge policy implication, policy relevance, and a real contribution. And also, I like the research design. I think this, the identification is solid, and also it's great data, great analysis. So overall, I think this paper checks a lot of, the very important boxes for what makes a good paper. Now, I want to briefly, go over 3 comments. They are more like a food for thought in terms of, what I think would be the high ROI type of things that the authors can do to further strengthen their contribution. So comment 1, if we look at this dynamic effects plot, it's very nice to see this, there's this, initial drop in restaurant spending, but then you have this real deal happening right after, the grace period, which I think is a great falsification test. But then things become interesting because in the end, I wish they had more data after that. But in the end, there seems to be an upward trajectory indicating that there might be a reversal. I think this is particularly interesting because this uptick can mean a rebound of the restaurant industry, or it can be redistribution of revenues across restaurant types. So what do I mean by that? If this is, this reversal represents a rebound, that only means that, whatever happens here is short term, is transitory, and you don't worry about it because the market itself corrects, right? So to shed light on that, of course, you can extend the analysis of flights if you don't have data on restaurants to confirm, whether or not people are coming back to the city, right? Or if this represents redistribution. So what I mean is that, one possible story is that maybe for locals with travelers gone, they have less wait time. They have more, less crowdedness. They have a better dining experience, right? So for existing restaurants, for locals, maybe, over time, they will find it, a better dining experience, therefore explaining the reversal. So this can, you can simply leverage the readily available Yelp data to see if there's any mention or any upward trajectory in terms of the restaurant quality. And also this goes back to, some questions raised by Ken and Carl on the dynamics in terms of entry and exit. So whatever we see here is, the average outcomes for the surviving restaurant, right? So when you think about the dynamic entry, it could be that surviving restaurants are gaining because compared to control cities, in newer cities, there are less entrants, right? Or it could be that on the margin, low quality restaurants are more likely to leave the industry, which makes the surviving restaurants to gain more, right? So these are the, some of the low hanging fruits that you can think about. Because I think this is important to figure out, to what extent this represents a rebound or redistribution, because they represent very distinct policy implications. And secondly, is about the mechanism. I think so far the mechanisms are pretty compelling. I just want to nudge you to think a little bit more and add more, diverse sort of, sources of evidence to support this mechanism story. For example, you talked about, spillover to New Jersey, right? People are dining more in New Jersey, but a necessary condition seems to be that if people are dining more, are they, spending the nights in New Jersey instead of the city when the travel cost in the city is higher? So some of the easy things you can do is to compare the flight arrivals in New Jersey versus LaGuardia and JFK. So that is something that you can check. And also you can check, you can zoom in to the restaurants in New Jersey. Are there, any gains, that are particularly concentrated near transit hotels or, restaurants frequented by non-locals, right? And also, this also connects to the taxi and the rideshare, right? If people are visiting New York City less because of the policy, are they traveling less by taxis and rideshare? And these data from Chicago and DC are readily available. So yeah, if you can use them as the control units, that would be great. And lastly, my comment regards, the identification and the inference. So first of all, Sudaba. So I know, you talked about, Sudaba between restaurants in the same city. That is good. But another Sudaba, which might not be primary, but it's a concern here, is that to the extent that the people are considering different cities as competing destinations. So the reduced restaurant spending in New York City can represent gains from other cities, right? So a thing to consider is to split the control cities into close versus distinct substitutes to New York City to see if the results hold similar, okay? And another thing is that this is a city level treatment, meaning that all the restaurants in the New York City will be either, all treated or all in the control. So if you cluster standard errors at the restaurant level, that would be exaggerating the statistical precision. So you can try, randomization inference and wide cluster bootstrap standard errors in order to kind of, to see if your results are still there. So these are just, some of the remedies you can think about. So with that said, I think the coolest thing that this paper talks about is that STR regulation is never just about housing, right? It is not only housing policy, it is also tourism policy, small business policy, and local physical policy. This is the unique lesson. I think this really adds to the future and the policy debates. So with that, I look forward to the conversations after. Thank you.
Well, this is great. I like the discussion. I like the table of that summarizes the benefits and costs. That was great, and all of the comments. So I think let me respond to some of them. So you talked about the recovery at the end. I think my feeling is that it's basically tourists are coming more to the city after several months, because this is something that we also see in the airport analysis, where basically we have like the same dynamic as the restaurant spending, the restaurant spending. But I do agree that it could be also interesting to look at the change in clientele restaurants. I think in general it's an interesting question to ask, like, if all, like, a lot of tourists disappear from restaurants, like how do the locals feel about that? And this is an interesting shock basically to look at. The surviving restaurants gaining more. This is interesting. I haven't thought about it. So we could look at that as well. So basically for New Jersey, there is evidence from AirDNA that basically the activity in Airbnbs in New Jersey is rising. So this is something. And then so you mentioned the taxi trips analysis. Actually, we have some analysis. We didn't include that in the paper. Basically, we have data from New York City about taxis and Uber and Lyft. And we do an year-over-year analysis. And what we see is the same decrease. So basically, we have trips originating from the airports, the main airports in New York City, to different basically census block groups in the city. And then we aggregate that up to the borough level. And what we find is that there is a decrease in Manhattan, there is a decrease in Brooklyn, but not so much in Queens, in Staten Island, and the Bronx. So we do have evidence for that. We have data on actually Chicago taxes as well, so we can compare to Chicago. And then finally, the spillover to other destination cities. So basically from AirDNA, again, they have like a report of who is gaining, who is losing from after the ban. So basically we can look at cities that basically didn't, for them, nothing has changed, and we can compare only to those. That can address, I think, this concern as well. Thank you.